don't think the Scotch.
I've never met anyone that knows how to play the bagpipes before.
I
This is
did.
the first.
I did. It was horrible.
Mary,
Good conversation.
Okay, yeah, we'll pick up there.
All right. Anyway, before we get back to the good old times of the Depression, let's try and compress about 100 years of history into about 5 minutes. Okay. See, your grandparents came
From Katerinoslav, Russia,
near Kiev, right?
near Kiev.
Okay.
Kiev Gubernia.
Did you ever hear? Did you hear some really good stories of all the rotten things they did to Jews? And I mean, just might start out with something fun, you know.
I grew up with them.
Yeah, okay. Do you remember
Sure.
like one?
well, a lot of fun, like a cholera epidemic.
Yeah, the way they used to chase their cows because they said they were of another religion, and my father went into the was supposed to go to the Russian army, and he escaped from that
He did.
and came around.
He escaped from Siberia, from
For he always used to talk about going
Japanese captivity.
about the fight in Port-Arthur, and it took me years to find out he meant Port Arthur.
Port Arthur.
Yeah.
Port Arthur.
Okay, so things were fun in Russia, and then about so this is about 1890.
Yeah, by
Yeah.
1893, my mother and his mother and my grandmother came here.
Just the three?
No, and my Aunt Rose and my Uncle Abe.
The children.
Okay, so four,
And my grandfather.
and your grandfather.
My grandfather.
Anybody else?
No,
That's
that
about
was,
it.
That was
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Now, was this a whole migration from the settled, or
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So everybody was running for wherever they can go. And,
Yeah. Most of the time, most of the men were running to get out of the Russian army.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our grandfather had been in the Russian
Yes,
army.
he was
17
The
years.
Russian war
he
with
was
Japan.
kidnapped
Yeah.
into the army. The usual thing.
Yeah.
So they just made a run for it and went through Europe and just straight to the United States?
I think so, yeah. I
They
think
came-
they landed in Canada, didn't they?
I don't.
Some of them.
They came to
Some of them went to
Chicago
Canada.
rather early. I think they didn't stay long in the port, and they lived on the near west side, which was, remember that
Yeah.
that was where most of the Jewish people lived in Chicago
Uh-huh.
when they first came those years. And
Then the Mount Washington Hospital, that's Mount Washington Hospital. No, that's
No.
not a hospital.
No.
I'll tell you the neighborhood in Chicago. It was Jefferson Street and a little west of Jefferson and around Roosevelt Road.
Okay, they didn't speak English at this time. They had no money.
The children learned English fast.
Yeah, your mother and my mother went to work in a cigar factory.
Yeah.
And it was in this cigar factory that they first started to unions. They had never had unions before.
That's right.
Okay, so now we're in what, 1910?
Oh,
10,
No.
yeah, about 12, 19.
well, 1910 was when I was born.
Uh-huh. You were born 1918?
1918, yeah.
My mother ran around with a crowd that included the Bolivans, who became the big theater people later.
Well,
Barney
his mother
Bolivan.
was
She used
a
to
So
talk.
were they pretty full of life?
She was a beauty. She met
His mother was 4.
Barney Bolivan, and
So these people were full of life. They
Oh,
were
yes.
involved in theater.
Oh, yeah.
Were-
they loved the Jewish theater. My mother used to
Oh,
talk about that.
I grew, yeah, I remember the biggest
went.
treat was to go to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never saw one, but you did.
Oh, yeah. I used to
on
sit-
11th Street?
I used to
Yeah.
sit on the chair between the two of them. My father was a show-off. So he would get the front row seat where you couldn't really see. It was the front row seat. And I remember getting the box of candy and listening to all the sad stories. The mother only liked them if they were sad. If they were comedies, they were no good.
Okay. So this was, you
was
lived
a
only
bad
among
taste.
Jews?
No, well,
Yeah.
the neighborhood later that they then moved to around Roby, now it's Damon, and my mother moved to Damon and 13th Street, and her mother and father moved to the neighborhood of Douglas Park,
Yeah.
which became quite a Jewish neighborhood. in those
And I
days.
remember your mother was very sick.
Yes, she was. She had
Very,
asthma.
very sick. I remember as a little girl, always going to see your mother.
Well, because she caught a bad cold and it turned into asthma. And, when I was about 8 years old, I had to run for the doctor in the middle of winter, a number of times, across the boulevard, across Roosevelt Road.
Gussie, can we bring your family into this? Okay, this is what, 1915, something like that. When did your family come over from Europe? Were they,
Mine?
uh-huh,
Yeah.
Around 1913.
1913, pretty close to the same time. From,
Yeah,
where are they from?
from Poland,
Uh-huh,
and some of them from Germany.
uh-huh. And your mother was from Germany?
Germany, yes.
And they, when did they come over?
My mother was born here. My father came over when he was 1 year old from Czechoslovakia.
Uh-huh, right. Okay, so then, okay, so you were born around the 20s and then, okay, so you spent your childhood here in Chicago, you in
Yeah.
New York, and childhood here in Chicago, and then, just as most of you were just getting to be teenagers or various ages, the Depression came. And that was, I don't know, to me, when I sit around and listen to you guys talk about the Depression, seems like, you know, going to Coney Island.
Well-
It seems like the greatest, it's fun.
No, it was-
I always remember you guys talking about it
It
like
was-
fun. I always wish, gee, I would, you know, miss
I
the
would
Depression.
say, I would say it was both the worst of times and in some ways the best of times.
Uh-huh.
Well, it was your attitude you took to whatever happened to you. Remember
But it was good. We weren't aware of hardships or anything like that.
we were.
Well,
we weren't
did you
real
call it the
poor.
Depression?
No.
Of course we
Oh,
did.
yes.
They called it a depression?
Yes.
Oh,
But, okay, we're talking about 32, 33.
Well,
that's exactly the
There
depression.
was another word too that they used that I don't remember.
But that depression was unforgettable.
Okay, nobody had, your family, no money.
What
Is
happened
anybody
was,
working?
Well, my father was a carpenter when the building trade stopped. I mean,
well,
he was a
he be-
carpenter, a contractor, and a wheeler dealer.
yeah, I remember when he became a contractor. And I remember when the war broke out, World War I. And the first thing I remember was the tremendous celebration at the end of World War I when the soldiers came back. And about that time, I remember a bunch of ambulances in front of my house, and I ran in. I thought, you know how a little child will think something terrible has happened, and always connected with myself and my family. But what had happened was that at the end of the war, there was a lot of racial trouble with the blacks, and we had some blacks that we loved on our street. They would play the banjo for us and sing wonderful songs. One of them, the reason for the ambulance is that one of them got killed. What happened was that he was on a streetcar, and some white fellas, he happened to, the streetcar jerked or something, and he stepped on the toe of a white girl. And they followed him all the way to the house, which was next door to our house. He ran in and got his army gun. He had been in the army, and he shot several of them, thinking he'd killed them. He ran up on the viaduct at Hastings Street, jumped down and was killed. And that's the reason for the ambulances.
And that wasn't an infrequent story.
No, there
Was
was
there a
lots
lot of, was a lot of racial
there was a lot
conflict
of
in the city?
racial trouble.
Different than today?
You know why? They were coming up from the south at the end of World War I, and that created trouble in the big cities.
I want to tell them what was even stranger than this. The Jewish people themselves were bigots. If you didn't come from, if you came from Germany, then they treated you with open arms. But if you came from small towns in Russia, it was horrible to
Well,
see
then
what
the
they
Germans,
did. And the
Jews
children
treated you
grew up
badly.
then,
yeah.
too.
I remember that.
Yeah. Did
But-
you have that here too?
Yeah.
Not so
So-
much in
Oh,
Chicago.
my mother and the whole, the family, you know, your mother and all that, they would talk about the various places these people came from.
Yes.
As if they were lower or upper.
Litvak.
Yeah, upper class.
Galician.
Okay, so, so you grew up in a ghettoized
We did.
neighborhood
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah.
Did you grow up with a lot of hope? Did you think like, okay, when I get to be older, I'm gonna get a real good job, and we're gonna
Not really.
get a home? And,
No, nobody.
not
Oh,
really.
I used to fantasize, I remember that.
But was the ghetto experience something that like made you feel we're gonna be here forever and our children?
No,
What kind of
no,
hope did you have
not
for your
me.
children?
Well,
We thought we'd make it. My father was working, but he made very little money, became a window cleaner, and walked around in the winter with his ladders on his back, and he washed
And my brother went to work in a candy factory because my father died when I was 2 years old, and somebody had to work, and my sisters worked, and he worked.
So there wasn't much time for...
There wasn't any time to think about the future and how wonderful it was going to be. As a matter of fact, I never thought it was going to be so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I went to work when I was about 10 years old, sweeping up a dentist's office. You know, about
Yeah.
3 times a week, something
Well, I
like that.
remember your brother Manny got the opportunity to go to college because he got the scholarship,
Well,
and then people
Yeah.
My
helped
brother
him.
did.
Well, my brother went to a junior college, and then somebody took an interest in him when he was going to law school. He started law school at night, and he was working for 2 rather wealthy men who owned a ranch in Colorado, as well as a business in Chicago. And they liked him. He was very bright, and they liked him very much.
I remember he stayed at our house while he was going to college. He lived.
Yeah.
Was education seem like the way?
Oh, yeah. There was
a universal...
In Jewish families, if a boy wanted to go to college, they did everything possible. The aunts used to come in from Brooklyn, and they sat around and they gave their few dollars, because if a boy wanted to go to college, then he had to go.
Mhm.
Now, my sister wanted to go to college too. It was out of the question.
No, well, we didn't have any aunts or uncles who were well-to-do, so my brother worked his way through.
Well, your mother was so sick, Harold.
That's
There was-
right. And
Whatever the family could have done was.
But his mother worked.
it was just, no, she didn't.
No,
After
no,
a while, she
she
had
was-
asthma, she couldn't work.
She could barely breathe.
Yeah, so we really were in a bad way until my sisters got old enough to work. And my brother then got a job. I remember his burning his hands in a candy factory. And I know that it was his intelligence and hard work that got him where he later, and luck too, because he met the son-in-law of the mayor of Chicago and went into business together, law business. And that was Mayor Cermak.
Oh, so what years were these?
This was around 1932.
Okay. So is this like really what was happening in the, I might call it the Jewish ghettos, that people were looking for the way for education, and they were sort of caught in very, very hard work and not much hope or opportunity unless there was education, or is that?
Well,
No, Harold, Bob, it's not really like that. In some families, yes. No, my brothers didn't go to college. My
No,
brothers
that's
had
right.
an inferiority
nor did my
complex.
sisters.
Why
And they
was
didn't
that?
have. They didn't have the belief in themselves.
Uh-huh. Was there a lack of hope in
Yes,
the
there
community?
was a lack
that-
of hope. No, it wasn't a community thing. It was with each
was
with
an
each
individual.
family. It was an individual.
Sure.
Would you say it was more of a wait and see attitude of what I was capable of doing or what the next
No.
person would?
No, it was
No,
built
they had
in.
to eat. You had to eat every day.
No, by that I mean, Gussie, what job, you applied for jobs and kept on applying, you didn't know whether you were fit for that job or not. That's the way it was with me.
Jerry, I got a job in a dime store.
Well, this is
Working
what I'm
every
talking
day
about.
after school.
Yes.
And both days of the weekend. And on Monday nights, we worked until 9 o'clock in the evening. We were going to school at the
And you
time.
were tickled to get that job.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
excuse me, my question
Oh,
is it different than it is for us with a different...
Yes.
Very
Why?
definitely, yeah.
Oh,
Why?
well, I guess my question is how I'm guessing it is.
Yeah, no comparison.
Education is practically guaranteed for most of the children here. Isn't
It's
that
easier
right?
for us, yes.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
That was all that was in
I
my
mean,
mind.
if you're smart, you can go to school.
There
You
were
have to be smart to go to
thousands of kids who dropped out before high school even. There were some who dropped out after a year or two of high
because of
school.
the conditions at home.
Yeah, you had to go to work to pay
Absolutely.
the rent or whatever you
Yeah.
can
So
do.
has that really affected the way the rest of your lives have gone?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Sure it
Absolutely.
did. Sure
Maybe
it
more
did.
conservative, more scared?
I'm a
more-
lunatic when it comes to spending, to putting money in the bank. You know, I take whatever I can. To this day, it's shameful. It's crazy.
Well, it's something that we're just different about. We
Well,
don't
what
quite
happened
understand
to
the
you
experience.
depended on you individually, I mean, to your mentality.
Mhm.
To me, politically, I think I was conscious politically when I was fourth year high school, or certainly in first year college, because I never forgot what happened to us and what sufferings we endured when I was a kid.
So that made you feel more compassionate?
I was
toward the
radical.
poor?
I don't
I became
remember
a
thinking
radical.
of it as suffering, though. I remember thinking of it, this is a way of life.
But do you feel more compassionate
it was
toward the
everything.
poor
It was a way of life.
the poor and the
Well, of
downtrodden
course,
because?
Of course. And yet there were two kinds of people. One kind said, to hell with the rest of them, I'm going to get somewhere and I don't care about what happens to anybody else. I never felt that way. From the beginning, I felt that my fate was wrapped up with all the poor people.
Well, I guess my question is, does having it so hard build character, and are we missing this?
It's hard to say. It depends on you. And
Sometimes it builds character and sometimes it kills it.
Sure it could. It could kill you
It
a lot of
physically.
people were beaten
hell
down
out of you
and-
when you're scared and you don't
It
have a
could kill you
job.
physically, mentally too.
So if you make it through, it's great. If
Or you
don't,
could,
you're-
you could get very tough and decide that no matter what happened, you could get something, you're going to get something.
How old was I here when I worked in the bakery and used to steal the bread?
I remember
the
that
cakes
very
and the
well.
rolls and bring them
As a matter of
home.
fact, we depended on her. I'm home with the breads.
I remember hearing one story about one smokefish. Is that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We used to divide it up into
We called her
whole
the
family.
caseworker in a joke, you know.
Really
We're
poor.
laughing now.
Yeah, it's very funny now.
But it was,
And
it
was funny
fun.
in a way
It
to
was
us
fun
because we were
then.
kids then.
We
Okay.
didn't feel deprived.
Uh-huh.
I mean, this was a normal
Well, if you're
thing.
talking about an 8 or 9-year-old kid, I could forgive it. But if they were in their teens already, then they were dummies.
Was it
Well,
just
we were
that you
dummies
remember the
then,
better
Gussie.
times,
Go
or
around
that they were?
laughing and
I
saying,
remember
hey, ain't
both.
we got
We
Well,
had big
You,
parties.
you mentioned, Bob, that if we notice any difference of our attitude or something like that, and there's an old saying about the people of our age, my age, or Ma's age, or Harold's age, is say, the kids today don't know how to work. We worked hard. You've heard that.
Mhm.
Now, whether that was because we were trained that we had to work that hard to maintain our job because there were 10 people